They say a banshee cries to herald the impending death of someone in a family. But one cold night in a small Irish village, her mournful wail was heard outside the window of a tavern, where a young American traveler was staying. The strange part was this. The man had come to Ireland for the very first time in his life and knew no one there. So he wondered why the banshee wailed to him in the middle of the night. Was it an indication of something he had wanted to know all his life? Emmett had lived his entire life in the United States. As far as he knew, his father immigrated to America from Ireland many years ago and started a quiet new life. Emmett never remembered Ireland, never spoke of it, and his father rarely did either. He just knew that he and his father had left the country after his mother died. But everything changed the winter his father passed away. Among the few belongings left behind was a letter, written in shaky handwriting. The letter was strange, almost fragmented, as though it had been written by a man whose thoughts were slipping away. His father apologized again and again for hiding the truth. He wrote that Emmett had once lived in Ireland as a child, in a small village called Doolin. That when they left the country, Emmett was only 4 years old, too young to remember anything. That his mother was left behind, pregnant and heartbroken, and that she wasn't dead as Emmett grew up believing. The letter never clearly explained why his father had left Ireland so suddenly. It never said why he had abandoned the family he once had there. It simply ended with a strange request. If you ever wish to know where you come from, go back to the village and meet your mother and possibly a sibling. Forgive me if you can. Emmett read the letter many times. The writing was confused and wandering, like the thoughts of a man in his final days. There were no names, no addresses, no explanations, just an apology, and a confession, and a place. For weeks, Emmett tried to ignore it, but the thought slowly grew inside him. Why should a part of my life that I didn't even know existed bother me so much now that I know about it? All his life, he had believed he had no family. Now, all of a sudden, there was a possibility that somewhere, in a quiet Irish village, his mother lived, and that he had a sibling he had never known. Emmett booked a flight. Doolin was smaller than he imagined, more gray than green. A few narrow roads, a handful of houses, and a single old tavern where travelers gathered at night. Beyond the village, the cliffs dropped sharp into the dark Atlantic. The wind there seemed to carry voices. It whistled and it wailed. Emmett rented a small room above the tavern named the Salty Dog. That night, sometime past midnight, he woke to a sound drifting across the hills. It wasn't a scream, wasn't quite crying either. It was something older, sadder. A long, mournful wail carried by the wind. He lay still in the darkness, listening. Was it a wolf's howl? Or do the sea winds make a sound like that when it passed through the cliffs? It came again, and again. Emmett fell asleep listening to it. The next morning, Emmett went on a walk and asked a few people in the village if anyone knew a man named James Ahern. Most of them said that they do not know him. A few of them said they would ask the older people in the family. During his conversations, he also mentioned the strange crying he had heard during the night. No one answered him directly. Some looked at him quietly. Others changed the subject. That evening, sitting in the tavern, Emmett mentioned it again. The bartender studied him for a moment before speaking.
"Hat would be a banshee,"
he said calmly. Emmett laughed nervously. The bartender continued.
"Well, as an American, You may find it difficult to believe. But in our folklore, a banshee is believed to be a female spirit whose mournful wailing heralds the impending death of a family member.
He explained further that the belief in a banshee is deeply rooted in Celtic tradition. The banshee embodies both reverence for ancestry and the inevitability of mortality, serving as a personal death omen rather than a malevolent ghost, he said.
He crease when someone in a family is about to die.
Emmett shrugged. That can't be meant for me, he said. I have no family. From the corner of the bar, an old man spoke quietly.
A banshee doesn't cry for a name, he cries for a bloodline.
He said in a deep voice.
If you have hard hair, you sure have one.
That night, the wailing returned, but this time it sounded closer, almost as if it were circling the village. Emmett stepped outside and followed the sound down a narrow road toward the cliffs, but the crying faded as he walked, and the wind swallowed it. The cry made him restless. It felt like the banshee returned to him every night to deliver a message, stronger each night. Over the next few days, Emmett met a few more villagers about his father. No one seemed to have heard the name Emmett knew. James Ahern. Are you sure this was his name? Doesn't sound Irish to me, someone said. They change their names when they go, said another. One morning, Emmett met an elderly woman at the flower shop. She was buying flowers. She had time and stopped to listen to Emmett.
Ahern,
she said, reflecting upon the name.
seems like your family name was originally O'Hara. I had a friend many years back, Shay O'Hara. She had a son and a daughter, but her husband fled with the son. He ran from a family feud and escaped with the boy. My friend was safe with her family, but was heartbroken. But they moved from Doolin long back, and I never heard from them since.
Then she grew very quiet. Emmett felt the ground shift beneath him. Could she be talking about his mother? And a sister? Would you know where they moved? Emmett crossed his fingers, hoping she would know. She paused, lost in thought. She pointed to the dock in the distance.
They moved to Dunraven. No, wait. They went to Glenmara, not far from here. You can take a ferry from the dock.
In Glenmara, it was not difficult to find the small cottage belonging to a woman named Shay O'Hara. It stood quietly at the edge of the village, not far from the old stone church that overlooked the sea. Emmett's knock was answered by a woman in her 30s. She studied his face for a moment with quiet curiosity before stepping aside and inviting him in. Inside the dimly lit room, an older woman lay resting in a small bed near the window. Time and illness had made her frail, but there was still something gentle in her eyes. When Emmett stepped closer, the woman slowly turned her head toward him. Her gaze lingered on his face, as though searching through many years of memory. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then softly, barely above a whisper, she spoke his name.
Just like your father, young Seamus.
A slow, silent tear slid down the side of her eyes into the pillow. Emmett felt something inside him give way. After all the years of questions and silence, the truth stood quietly before him. This woman was his mother. That evening, as darkness settled over the cliffs beyond Glenmara, the mournful wail returned once more across the wind. Emmett had heard it the previous nights, drifting through the hills like a sorrow carried by the sea. When he spoke of it to his mother, she smiled faintly. In a quiet voice, she told him of the old legend of the Banshee. a spirit said to watch over certain Irish families, whose cry warned that death was near.
She has cried for our family before.
She said gently, her hand resting in Emmett's. But then she looked at him with a warmth that seemed to soften the sadness in the room.
Perhaps this time, she cried not only for death, but to bring my son home before I had to leave.
She whispered. Word spread quietly through the village, and the next day, the woman who had opened the door returned with her husband and children. She stood beside Emmett, with eyes that mirrored his own. She was Maeve, the sibling he had crossed an ocean to find. His sister. Together they stood beside their mother's bed, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing as evening settled outside the cottage windows. It was a strange and tender moment. A family meeting, fully for the first time in a room that felt both heavy with sorrow and filled with something quietly healing. For Emmett, who had lived his entire life believing he had no family beyond his father, the room now held his sister, a brother-in-law, and two small nieces watching him with shy curiosity. And his mother. And for the first time, the space he had carried all his life began to feel a little less hollow. That night in Glenmara, the wind moved softly across the cliffs. Far out beyond the village, the cry of the Banshee rose one last time into the darkness. But now the sound felt different. Not frightening, just a lonely voice fading slowly into the night. Standing there, Emmett realized something he might never have understood had he never followed his father's strange letter back across the ocean. Without that cry carried on the wind, he might have lived his entire life never knowing his sister, never meeting the family that had quietly been waiting for him all along. The Banshee's keening cry, Emmett realized, is to prepare the living for loss, transforming personal grief into shared remembrance. It was not malevolent. The Banshee in Celtic culture is, after all, a sorrowful guardian of family lines, through the fragile boundary between the living and the dead.